We're witnessing a devastating escalation in the war on Gaza, marked by relentless Israeli bombardment of civilian areas and a deepening humanitarian catastrophe. The toll on innocent lives grows more unbearable with each passing day. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's latest statements on the regional conflict include comments on prisoner exchanges and the ongoing conflict with Iran. Elsewhere, the Russian-Ukraine conflict continues on as diplomatic efforts seek to bring the fighting to an end. Let's start with the latest developments in Gaza here on In Focus. As the war on Gaza intensifies, the Washington Post reports that Israel is carrying out mass demolitions and erecting military fortifications in residential areas of northern Gaza, where tens of thousands of Palestinians have been forced to flee their homes. In addition, more than 100,000 Palestinians have been driven from the affected areas over the last 11 weeks, according to the United Nations, leaving an estimated 30,000 to 50,000 people. The newspaper added that Israeli forces have demolished entire neighborhoods, established military fortifications, and built new roads. And for more analysis, we are joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, an expert in international relations. A very warm welcome, sir. And it's a pleasure to have you with us on the show today. Doctor, the recent Israeli raid on El Mawasi killed at least 7 Palestinians. How would you characterize the IOF's strategy in targeting civilian areas like El Mawasi? And what does this mean for the humanitarian situation in Gaza, sir? At this point.
Thank you for having me, Rana. Of course, the Israeli army of occupation has made a habit over the past month of targeting safe humanitarian zones or supposedly designated safe humanitarian zones inside the Gaza Strip, including Al-Mawasi, which is the largest humanitarian safe zone inside Gaza. It has been targeted numerous times, causing thousands of casualties between dead and injured. And it is part of a larger strategy adopted by the Israeli army of occupation that aims to exercise maximum military pressure on Hamas and on the local population of Gaza, or the Palestinians of Gaza. And this two-pronged approach has 2 goals. One is a very short-term goal, and that is to apply pressure on the people of Gaza so that they would turn on Hamas eventually and force them to make more concessions in order to reach a deal that caters to the war aims of Israel, which will deliver them the result of this war as a victory at the end of the day. And the long-term goal is to cement the impression in the psyche of all of the people of Gaza that nowhere is safe, and that wherever you are, we will get you, and we will kill you, and we will wound you, and we will put your life in jeopardy, and the life and the well-being and safety of your children and families in jeopardy. And the ultimate aim is to convince the people of Gaza is that they cannot stay in their lands anymore, with the ultimate goal of ethnically cleansing them out of the Gaza Strip. The only thing that stands as an obstacle in the way of achieving these very vile designs is the will of the people of Gaza and their insistence on not abandoning their land or leaving their lands like they were forced to do in 1948. And the second thing that stands in the way, of course, is the utter refusal of Egypt to accept the Egyptian government, of course, led by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who totally rejects the idea of displacing the Palestinians or driving them off their lands.
Okay, Dr. Mohammed Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia reported continuous Israeli drone strikes despite being a medical facility. How can the international community address Israel's deliberate targeting of hospitals, of course, like Indonesian hospital and Auda, and essential infrastructure, sir? And when will this stop ever?
So let's count together. Kamal Adwan, and before that, as you mentioned, the Indonesian hospital, Al-Auda Hospital, and even Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest medical facility in Gaza. Most of the major healthcare institutions and medical institutions of the Gaza Strip, according to the United Nations, have been destroyed by the Israeli military. This should be addressed by the international community as a blatant war crime.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you, but I think that the international community did address once and twice, and all the international bodies did address, and without no response from Israel. And Israel is continuing its atrocities and genocides, and they don't want to stop under any condition.
That's the only thing they can do. We should not call upon the international community to address anything. We should call upon the United States to address this issue as it is, a war crime and a grave violation of international law, specifically international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The International Court of Justice considered the Israeli violations as, classified them as some sort of an attempted genocide, or so it said that the people of Gaza were at risk of being victims of genocide if Israeli policies and actions persist in the manner they do, and they have been, of course, for the better part of a year now, since the ruling of the ICJ, and Israel has been continuing that without any deterrence. If anything, the United States is criticizing the ICJ. And also, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, issued arrest warrants against senior Israeli officials, chief among them, of course, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, on account of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, just like the targeting of hospitals and medical facilities. However, what makes Israel enjoy this kind of immunity and impunity is the political cover provided by the United States, unfortunately. And the United States would prevent sanctions in the United Nations, because sanctions have to go through the United Nations Security Council, so the U.S. will never let that go. They will always exercise their veto power.
Dr. Mohammed, with food shortages pushing thousands of Palestinians to the brink of starvation and famine, how would you describe the long-term impact of Israel's siege on Gaza and its blockade of humanitarian aid? And also, sir, what do you think of water as a war weapon that Israel uses against Palestinians and of course, the Middle East now as we talk?
You see, this will be a continuation of my previous answer. This is a manifestation of an act of genocide. How do you eliminate a population? Other than killing them and bombing them into oblivion, you deprive them of shelter, you deprive them of healthcare, you deprive them of food, and you deprive them of water. Basically, you deprive them of basic sustenance. So when this happens, people die eventually, or they leave. And this is what genocide is. Genocide, according to the Genocide Convention, is destroying in total or in part a certain population or nation. And this is exactly what's happening to the Palestinians as a national ethnic group and an indigenous people and indigenous inhabitants of the Gaza Strip. Depriving them of water, for example, and food in northern Gaza aims to empty northern Gaza of the remaining Palestinian residents. They have already managed to drive 100,000 Palestinians out of Jabalia, for example. Most of the population of Beit Lahia, Jabalia, and Beit Hanun in the outmost northern part of Gaza has been largely evacuated. A few thousand people are left there, and they will force them to move eventually. And this is an act of ethnic cleansing, of course. And there is even talk of settlement building and as you said, the erection of military infrastructure in northern Gaza, which means that they are aiming or are planning to maintain a permanent presence over there. So this is an act of genocide, and of course it will have huge humanitarian ramifications on the people of Gaza at large. And depriving people of food is a violation of a basic human right.
We hope, sir, all the better for all the Palestinians and for these atrocities and genocides to end as soon as possible. That was Dr. Mohammed Osman, expert in international relations, joining us from Cairo. Thank you very much for your intellectual, informative insights and knowledge, sir. Always a wonderful guest with us now. We move on to a session in the Knesset plenum on Monday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed cautious optimism about the chances for a detainee deal with Hamas. According to Times of Israel, gaps between Israel and Hamas over a possible Gaza ceasefire deal have narrowed. Crucial differences have, however, yet to be resolved as fighting continues in the war-torn enclave. Netanyahu has stated that there are more challenges ahead of Israel and that he is determined to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. For more analysis, we are joined from occupied Jerusalem by Dr. Munir Noseba, Professor of International Law. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sir, Netanyahu recently said that there has been some progress in talks over the exchange of detainees. How do you interpret his comments, and what impact will the exchange have on the broader situation in Gaza?
I'm actually unable to understand really what he said, because we have been hearing this for several months now. There have been attempts to secure a ceasefire under many titles and names, whether a humanitarian ceasefire that would allow for humanitarian aid to be pumped into the Gaza Strip, or a ceasefire that would end this genocide by exchanging prisoners and sealing a deal. But every time we approach the end of this negotiation, something happens, and Israel eventually decides not to go forward with it. So I'm quite concerned. I don't really believe now, every time I hear that we are close to a deal. Obviously, everybody hopes for something like that to happen, because we want this genocide to stop. We want the humanitarian aid to reach to the population of Gaza that is very much in need to this humanitarian aid. However, what we are observing is a continuation of the starvation of the people of Gaza, a continuation of the destruction of the Gaza Strip, but not only that, also expansion of the war into new spaces. We could see how
this is
now
what Netanyahu wants, sir, right?
Exactly, this is exactly what he wants.
Because I got mixed up.
Yeah, exactly. He's now occupying new spaces in Syria, despite the fact that Syria is not threatening any security considerations that he might cite are certainly untrue. I mean, Syria is very busy with its domestic situation.
Sir, conclusion-wise, he wants to change the map. Netanyahu's focus on Iran, sir, and labeling it as part of axis of evil, seems to dominate his narrative. How does this shift the attention away from the war on Gaza, sir?
Certainly, I think that Netanyahu is hoping to expand the war and to have allies helping him in expanding this war, especially the United States. I think he is hoping that with the Trump administration, he will be able to fulfill his dream of having a very major attack on Iran, and at the same time he can continue his war and his colonization also in Palestine. I mean, in the West Bank, the dynamic right now is further colonization, a will to annex further territory from the occupied West Bank. There are movements now within Israel that are working on developing the plans to colonize in the Gaza Strip, to construct settlements in the Gaza Strip. So all of these colonial dreams are being fulfilled under the cover and under the smoke of the ongoing war that probably Netanyahu wants to expand in order to make sure that nothing obstructs Israel's colonial ambitions in Palestine and beyond. I mean, we noticed over the past weeks how a number of Israelis also want settlements in Lebanon and further in Syria. This is not new. This is something that we have been observing since the Nakba of 1948.
Of
it's
course,
always
sir,
a colonization in expansion.
he is also, sir,
It
he's
never
also,
stops.
go ahead, sir.
Sorry, I
He's
was
also
saying it never
facing
stops.
internal problems and criticism inside Israel from the Israeli citizens as well about the detainees issue. And
Well, yes.
okay,
Yes,
sir,
I mean,
despite widespread international condemnation of Israel's actions in Gaza, Netanyahu maintains his position on military escalation. How do you think this stance is affecting Israel's global image and its relationship with its allies, which you mentioned, the United States, on top of all?
Look, certainly the global image of Israel has really changed. We are witnessing now fundamental changes in strategic relationships that Israel has enjoyed over the past decades. The relationship with countries like Norway, like Spain, like Ireland, which is intending to turn the Israeli embassy into a Palestine museum, are certainly signs of the changing view of Israel, not as an ally, but more of a state that is continuing with its genocide and other crimes against humanity, including apartheid. The UN General Assembly has issued a resolution demanding that that Israel ends its occupation and calling for sanctions against it.
Where,
So
sir, the
world,
actions? At the end of the day, there are no actions yet.
not really. There are some actions, but not sufficient. So certain countries have started with sanctions. We have Turkey, we have a number of European countries, we have a number of Arab countries also that has already changed its relationships with Israel. Of course, this has not led to Israel ending its genocide and ending its violations, but this is not something that can happen overnight. You need to accumulate the critical mass of sanctions for Israel to start rethinking its position. This is something that we've seen in the past in different places, including, for example, South Africa. The regime in South Africa continued to seem strong until its fall and collapse.
Okay,
and then
sir,
it was,
Netanyahu has been facing corruption charges while leading Israel during this war. Sir, parallelly, of course, at the same time, how does this focus on the internal divisions in Israel and aggression on Gaza affect his leadership, both domestically and internationally, sir, as, of course, Netanyahu has no more credibility anywhere?
To be honest with you, this is a very sad thing to watch. While Netanyahu is accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity by the International Court of Justice, and there is an arrest warrant against him for really, these terrible crimes, we can see that the Israeli domestic legal system only is holding him accountable for certain acts of corruption. And this shows us that the system itself is corrupt. A system that does not hold a person accountable for really major crimes like war crimes and crimes against humanity, and only looks at what bottles of champagne the leader received as gifts, and I don't know what other accusations there are, shows a really big problem within the Israeli judicial system. If the Israeli judicial system was working according to international law, of course, this war would not have lasted until now. This genocide would not have been possible until today. So it's unfortunate. Yeah, that's the sad part of this trial.
Sir, unfortunately, I'm out of time, and that was Dr. Munir Noseba, Professor of International Law, joining us from Occupied Jerusalem. Thank you very much for your insights, sir. Now moving to Russia-Ukraine war, where the Washington Post reports that Ukrainian President Zelensky has in recent weeks signaled a greater willingness for negotiation to end this war. The newspaper highlighted that Zelensky's change in his narrative can probably be attributed to a worsening situation on the front line and an incoming US administration that has put future security assistance for Kiev in doubt. In recent meetings with Trump and European leaders, however, Zelensky has focused more on securing peace for Ukraine while looking to achieve his top priority, an invitation to NATO, according to Washington Post. And for more analysis, we are joined from Moscow by Olga Krasniak, Professor of International Relations. A very warm welcome to the program. And I'd love to ask you if I made a mistake in the name to say your name again.
That's okay. Olga Krasniak.
Okay. Ms. Olga, there have been reports that multiple countries are willing to host talks between President Vladimir Putin and Trump. What do you think these talks could potentially mean for the future of the conflict in Ukraine and for the US-Russian relations?
Well, first, what we need to understand that this is a military conflict, not exactly between Russia and Ukraine, but between Russia and the West. And Ukraine is just only used by Western countries to somehow to contain Russia, well, in this more wider geopolitical landscape. And of course, if we take in this equation as a basic line, so we understand that the United States plays a very important role. And for almost these 3 years, the United States as well as the European countries, they supported Ukraine in its fight with Russia. Again, it's not about to help Ukraine, but to make more damage to Russia. And the role of the United States with the new administration, I think it will be critical to the development of this conflict. And it seems that this conflict will come to an end. But the real question here on one conditions or what conditions, because definitely for Russia, it would be the conditions which were announced by Putin many times. And peace negotiations, of course, are possible and they're inevitable, just only considering Russia's interests. And in this kind of military equation, I do not see any ways for Ukraine. So yes, the decision will be between the United States and Russia.
The decision will be between the United States and Russia. Okay, US-elect Donald Trump has indicated his willingness to meet with the Russian President Vladimir Putin to resolve the conflict. What is your assessment of the potential for meaningful dialogue, considering the current status of the war and the stakes for both Russia and Ukraine?
Well, if we take from a diplomatic perspective, as it would be maybe a reasonable way for any new elected president to come maybe to make a state visit or maybe just to invite some world leaders to its residency. Of course, we cannot exclude any meeting between Trump and Putin as two presidents of two greatest countries, two biggest countries at least in the world. And in this case, I do not see why it would not be possible. Because Russia, I believe, welcomes Donald Trump and the vice versa. So, and in this case, so some negotiations will happen and some talks will be happening. And if we take into consideration a previous experience of Donald Trump, not just only his meeting with Vladimir Putin, but his meetings with Kim Jong-un of North Korea.
Okay, can I please ask you here, the war in Ukraine has caused significant shifts in global politics. How has this conflict affected NATO's role in Europe, and what are the long-term security implications for the continent?
Well, I do not see it like a big problem or big change for European continent, except for one reason. Russia cannot accept the idea as Ukraine will be part of NATO. Basically, this is the main reason of this conflict. But this Ukrainian conflict is a part of maybe global conflict, or maybe not even the conflict, but the shift of in geopolitical power or the shift in world order. And in this case, I think we can look at the Ukrainian conflict as the same line with with a problem in the Middle East, so in Syria, in Palestine, or even something what is happening in Sahel, in sub-Saharan Africa. So we see all these geopolitical tensions. They are somehow have developed into these global shifts here and there. So, and Ukraine just part of this world map.
Okay, that was Olga Krasenyak, Professor of International Relations, joining us from Moscow. Thank you very much for your insights and, of course, for your valuable, informative knowledge. That concludes today's episode of In Focus. Thank you for joining us on In Focus. Stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.